Hey, social workers. Hi, here's Daisy. She's helped me out today. Okay, so welcome to week 5 of Social Work 321. Hope you're all enjoying this class. You've got some important concepts to understand this week. We have a quiz at the end of the week, our second quiz, and it's a good one. Just, it covers a lot of information, but mostly I want to see that you're learning by practicing. And so essay quiz, I love essay questions. Elaborate, share with me what your thoughts are, share with me what you're learning from the textbook, share with me what you're learning by practicing these concepts with friends and family. Okay, as you can see, we've covered a lot of material early on in this course. I do that on purpose because we have to have a good background. We have to have a good framework to work from when we begin doing therapy and counseling individuals. So we have to have all that background of, social justice, diversity, making sure that we're culturally aware, that kind of thing. That kind of lays a foundation for what we're going to do in talking with people. A lot of people don't really understand how complex the soft science of social work can be, but it is. We want to have the scientific method behind us, and so it is more complex than it seems. So I have you read through those first 6-7 chapters, and now we're starting on chapter 8 in week 5. But the title of this chapter is Beginning. Yeah. It feels like we began a long time ago, doesn't it? But we didn't. We're just now, we do that as all foundation work so that now we can begin working with clients. And so I'm going to go over this PowerPoint with you. And I want to just make sure that you understand some of the basic concepts in chapter 8, titled Beginning. So first impressions are super important, aren't they? You've heard this saying, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, right? So this holds true in working with clients as a social worker. Not all of you will end up working in therapy, but I think a lot of you will. A lot of you will be doing one-on-one and group therapy situations. And whether or not that's what you do, you need to have a basic understanding of how important that first impression is. I just took a course for professors that was about the beginning of a class, how important it is to make a good impression at the beginning of every class we teach. And I don't think I did a very good job today because I'm not a mean doggy owner, I promise, but she's pretty sensitive, right? Yeah, I know, she's really cute too. She is. She's a good lap warmer. But so here's kind of my first impression thing, attention getter. We like to use those as well as, not only in a classroom, but in social work as well, when we're working, one-on-one with clients. So what's the first impression? Probably our face. Maybe it's our voice on the phone, but we want to make sure that our clients understand from the very beginning that part of what we do as a social worker is that unconditional positive regard, right? That's a big part of what we do. And that can be pretty challenging if you're working in a prison situation, if you're working with someone who has a conviction, which I've done a lot of. But you know what? You're not going to judge them for that. You are going to see them as their own individual that has a unique perspective of the world. And so hopefully that unconditional positive regard is at the surface of who you are as an individual. Now, that doesn't mean that if you get someone that comes into your office who is physically abusing someone else, especially a child or an elderly person, you're not going to say, well, that's okay, are you? No, because that's a big part of who you are as a social worker, is someone who stands up for injustice, someone who takes a stand when someone is being mistreated. So At the same time, we can still have unconditional positive regard for the individuals that we work with. We don't accept surface behavior as who that person is at the very core, but we also don't justify bad behavior. So that initial face-to-face contact is going to affect all future encounters, and the beginning portion of each sequential interview tends to influence the course of those meetings as well. So the beginning of every interview that you have, of course, what's the first thing you do? What? Right, your confidentiality statement. Very good. What happens here stays here unless someone's in danger. So what are some of the things that we do the very first time we work with someone, we meet an individual? Obviously, you're going to introduce yourself. If you've read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, you recognize that finding out more about the other person is a good way to endear yourself to someone. So you're going to seek introductions. You're going to introduce yourself, and often the way that you will do that is describe who you are and what you do. You know, what's your initial purpose for being there. Hi, welcome to my office. I'm a social worker. That means I see all aspects of an individual. Obviously, you can't go so far in depth, but you can, at the very surface, give the other person an idea of who you are. Just by saying social worker, most people have a general understanding of who that is, but a lot of people have kind of a warped perspective. They think, aha, you're here to take my kids. And so that might be part of your introduction. Not all social workers are about removing children from homes, right? But orienting the client to what you're going to be talking about, discussing policy, ethical factors, and seeking feedback. These are all some of the beginning skills we're going to talk about. So some of the common ways for making contact with a client includes reaching out. The client might have reached out to you or to the agency, and sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes the social worker may reach out to a client's system to offer help. Someone else may believe that a client system would benefit from help and request that a social worker or an agency intervene. So, you know, a very common way for a session to begin is, why are you here, right? I often say don't ask why questions because they're generally accusatory in nature, but maybe tell me a little bit about why you decided to come and talk to me today. And I think that's one of the rare times asking why is not accusatory. Why are you here? You know, what do you hope to get out of our session today? That is a good question to ask at the beginning of every session, even if you've worked with someone for months. Some of the most effective beginnings include result when the worker and the prospective client, first of all, when they accomplish the purpose for which they first meet, okay? And if they reach a mutual agreement, if they can agree, and that's kind of human nature, right? To agree. If you think about it, when we meet another individual, we want to connect with them. We want to agree on some level. You know, you're at a bar. Oh, I'll have what he's having, right? You know, we want to have a level playing field. Okay, so having something in common with that individual. And it can be as simple as, I like your scarf, right? Pink's my favorite color, you know, something like that. But when first meeting a client, make sure that you identify yourself by your full name. Make sure that you mention the agency that you're with, because that says something about who you are. Some of us need to actually be taught smile, right? That's okay. Facial expressions are very important. When you're working with clients on the autism spectrum, or if you yourself are on the autism spectrum, then that's something you're going to need to be sensitive to. If you're someone who doesn't like to be touched, that doesn't mean that the person that you're with has that same tendency, right? If you're a hugger, that doesn't mean the person that you are being a social worker for has that same inclination. In fact, it's always a good rule to never touch your client. Even, there's some incidences where that's okay. I had a very firm rule that if a child wanted a hug from me, they would get it, no questions asked. And I will not be the first to let go. However, I think it's important to note that children who have been sexually assaulted might seek physical affection, and not really understanding that could be the intent of the person that they're hugging. And so you really do need to be careful about that. And most policies have definite guidelines. When I was a school social worker, that was one of the very firm guidelines. We don't ever touch a student. At the same time, you need to be sensitive, though, because there might be times when that's what an individual needs is a physical embrace. I like doing them side embraces. That can be a little safer. So seeking introductions, ask a client how they want to be addressed. Make sure that you pronounce their name correctly. Find out what their name is from them, not from reading it, because you might be pronouncing it wrong. In family and group contexts, you may find it useful to ask members to introduce themselves in a go-around. And what's important about this is, again, like we've talked about in the past, there might be members of the family that are considered to have less value than others, and this is an important time to recognize that. When we first start a session, if it's in a group setting, then take a look at where people sit. Sometimes the most prominent member of the family will sit in the most prominent seat. I worked with one family where the young girl had an eating disorder, and when she and her parents came in, guess who sat in the most prominent seat? It was the daughter. It wasn't the mom or dad. It was the daughter. She knew why she was there, and she knew that she had value in the family, and she was kind of in charge, So that's an interesting way to kind of evaluate, to analyze what a family is all about by taking a look at their body language. We've talked a lot about that. Looking at where people sit. Watching the facial expressions, listening to the tone of voice when people introduce themselves. How long did they take to introduce themselves? It could be that, the person who's being scapegoated in the family, one word, and they say their name and that's it. They say their first name and that is it. And that can be an important signal. So pay attention to those things. Friendly facial expressions. Handshakes used to be appropriate. Not so much anymore after COVID, right? Maybe elbow bump. But we're going to be culturally sensitive because in some cultures, maybe it's appropriate to bow. Ask the client not only how they want to be. One of the things that I would do is I would write down how they wanted to be introduced, because I wouldn't always remember it. And so writing it on the outside of the file, making sure that I wrote phonetically how they pronounced their name. And then in future sessions, that gives you kind of a foot in the door, because especially if they have a name that's hard to pronounce, if you get it right and you say their name, then you're endearing yourself to someone. One of the important things, and your textbook doesn't really talk about this, but I want to share some of the aspects of being a professional social worker with you that you're not going to read in a book, okay? A lot of the aspects of professionalism you learn only on the job, but I want to share some of those ideas with you. And one that I learned is that part of what you're doing in your very first session with an individual, especially if you end up being an LCSW, where you have a practice, where you're working one-on-one with individuals as a therapist, you want them to return. You want to have a good client base, because that, especially if you're doing contract work, that is how you're going to make your living. And so, yeah, this isn't something that's going to be talked about necessarily in a textbook, but you're going to want clients to return. And so being a safe place for them, being someone that they know they can confide in, these are very important aspects of that connection that you have with them. you want to express that unconditional positive regard, not only because it's therapeutic, not only because it will open up the client and help them recover from some of the challenges, the emotional challenges that they're dealing with, but it will also endear you to them and they will want to return. And so, yeah, I know that's not something that is really talked about a whole lot, but it's an important aspect of being a professional. And maybe that's the wrong phrase, endearing yourself. It's not really about endearing, but it's about helping your client recognize you are a professional, you are a safe place, you're here to help them. One of the things that might be important is letting them know what your specialty areas are, especially if that's one of the issues that they're dealing with is something that's within your professional expertise. So describing that initial purpose is super important. And socialization, so identity development and skill development. Sometimes we're doing re-socialization. And in the agency that I owned and ran, where I taught domestic violence classes, this was a lot of what we do. Now, I was accredited through the board in Carson City. There is actually a domestic violence board. Did you know that? And so I had to, in order to be accredited through them, I had to submit about a 3-inch binder full of materials that they require. And one of the things that is required in the state of Nevada to conduct court-ordered domestic violence classes is that you need to have both a male and a female. When you've got a group full of men at a domestic violence class, there needs to be both a male and a female representative. So what are we doing? We're re-socializing these individuals. We're kind of giving them most of these individuals grew up in very dysfunctional families. We're kind of simulating a functional family unit. And I actually took that from one of the opening chapters of a group therapy textbook from graduate school. In which you recognize that one of the goals in group therapy is to re-socialize your clients so that they can have a basic understanding of what a functional family would look like. So is there positive unconditional regard in a functional family? Oh yeah. And so that's what you're modeling for these individuals. You're going to describe your initial purpose and make sure that that's clear. If you're an advocate, a case manager, an educator, a broker, these are all roles that you have as social workers. Many of us are mediators. I know the social workers that I've worked with who have become professional mediators had to do some extra training to be able to have that credential. Make sure that you orient your clients. New clients are unsure what to expect. They're probably anxious, right? First time, think about your own life experience. The first time you attended an exercise class, a social work class, the first time you went to church or walked into a bar, whatever. How did you feel about it? Maybe you were unsure. And as you went back to that institution, you were more comfortable in subsequent times. So make sure that that very first meeting, your client is comfortable. And orienting them as to what the process will entail is very important. One of the things that I try to do in our little sessions, the lectures that I do over YouTube, is tell you at the beginning of each class what we're going to be talking about that day, and then talk about it, right? So that is something that hopefully I'm modeling for you what you can do in your sessions with clients. Tell them what you're going to be talking about, and then do so. So discuss policy, discuss ethical factors. It's information about the agency policies and ethical factors. That's important. Anytime there is, if there is something where you have an ethical dilemma, you can often blame it on the policy. For example, let's say that you have a client that wants to give you some kind of a gift, and you know that goes against the code of ethics to have a dual relationship with the client. So you can just say, you know what, our agency, it's against our policy to accept gifts from clients, and that will cover your butt in many, many, many ways. So, understanding ground rules is a critical element in developing an authentic, honest, and trusting relationship. So starting at calling it ground rules, that can kind of be very effective, especially when you're working with kids. Again, confidentiality needs to be talked about up front. Mandatory child abuse or elderly abuse reporting is really important. Action required if a person is a danger to themselves or others. Fees and cancellation policies. This can be really important, especially when you're doing your LCSW internship. If you're working with Medicaid clients, making sure that they understand that what the upfront payment is, and you might have a lot of individuals who cancel. And so make sure that what I did is I kind of gave them 3 strikes and you're out. So, and I had to tell that the very first few minutes of the very first session, I'm going to give you 3 times. If you don't show, then on the 3rd time, I can't see you again. Our sessions will be done. And so if you make that very clear from the beginning, then there's no confusion later on. Make sure that your clients understand procedures for discussing, and if they ever have a dissatisfaction with the service, make sure they understand who they can talk to about that. I think it's really important that you let them know from the beginning, talk to me. If you have a problem, talk to me. And professional social workers, this is a very important concept for you to understand really well. It was on the board exam 3 different times when I took it, and that is, if you have a problem with someone, go directly to that someone, whether it's a supervisor, whether it's an instructor, whether it's a fellow professional. Make sure that you go to that individual first and foremost. We don't go over people's heads until after we've gone to the individual. And making sure that clients understand that and you communicate that to them, I think is pretty important too. An important part of communicating effectively involves checking whether others have understood your messages. So throughout that initial assessment session, make sure that you're getting feedback. Do you understand anything? Is there any questions that you want to ask? Think about last time you went to a doctor. I'll get home from going to a doctor and I'm like, oh, I was going to ask this and this and this, right? And so I've learned to write down the questions that I have. But a lot of people, it's a similar situation when they visit with a social worker. So make sure that you're clarifying. If you do have questions, be sure to email me later on. Here's my email, and make sure that you're providing that they're providing that feedback for you and vice versa. So it's not going to happen just in the beginning. You're going to get feedback throughout the whole session, maybe even afterward. When you seek feedback, you send a message that this is a mutual and reciprocal process. I've shared with you before the idea that, in social work, we don't call the people we work with patients. Even social workers in hospital settings, that it's so kind of ingrained in who we are that we still call these individuals clients, partly because it gives us equal footing. Okay, we're not an authority figure. We are we're a broker, right? We are a mediator. We're someone who is on the same level of them. The idea, when I was a school social worker, I would often get down on my knees to talk to kids. So, that whole idea of seeing the world from their perspective, right? Coming at them from their level, okay? So when we're working with adults, we want to have that same idea of mutual respect. And one of the things I often told my teenagers is that, I respect you. When we treat other people with respect, we get respect in return, right? And so that's a big part of what we're doing as social workers. It's not about being an authority figure. It's about being someone who can see the world from their perspective. And let me tell you, that will definitely give you a sense, it will give your client a sense of connection with you. And that's what it's all about, connecting. So this is a great chapter beginning. But again, we're going to go back to all the other chapters. We're going to refer to them often this semester. And I hope you're gobbling this up. I really hope that you're enjoying using these, the different exercises. And I hope you're writing down the answers to these. For example, you have all of these sample sessions. There's one in your textbook that says, what would you say if you're walking, you parked your car and you walk past someone who's carrying a sign that says, "I'm homeless, please help me." I think that's really interesting. What is a social worker's response to an individual like that versus other people out there? And I think that's something you should think about. I personally don't give people money because I know where it goes. I had one client. I had a homeless client who was court ordered to take my domestic violence classes, and he told me, so I hold my sign up. He had a dog too. I hold my sign up. I get enough to pay for my vodka so I can function, enough to get some food for my dog, and then I start getting enough money for your classes. Okay. So I have a strict policy. I don't hand out money, but I keep granola bars and water in my car. And I have been known to buy Happy Meals, hamburgers, that kind of thing. But I won't give money, and that's just my own personal policy. I always, one of the standard things that I say is, what's your story? What's going on? Especially when they're young people. That breaks my heart to see young people. And so, but I won't give money. Food, yeah, a lot of it, because, that whole nurturing instinct that a lot of you have as social workers. So, all right, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to call, text, or email me. I'm here for you. I love hearing from you guys. I'm really proud of you. All of you are doing really, really well. I'm enjoying your papers. I'm enjoying to get to know you through them. And don't hesitate to call me, text, or email. I'm here for you.